Heretic is a movie that I've been looking forward to coming out for a while now. Starring Hugh Grant, this was a film that was deeply focused on faith, religion, control, iterations, and interpretation. And that final one in particular was a theme that could most definitely be applied to the entirety of the film, especially the ending. With a topic that was extremely thought-provoking and Hugh Grant in one of his best roles that he's been in for several years. Let's take a deep dive into the film and discuss what the ending truly meant, the deeper themes that can be taken away, and most importantly, answer if it's worth watching. Here is a review of Heretic and the ending explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The ending explained. Hugh Grant's character Mr. Reed was an individual that had spent a large portion of his life studying religion in the hopes of finding the right one to follow. And it was through that where he saw that there were a lot of similarities between them, which in turn made each and every one of them less valuable and believable in his eyes. The main thing that stood out to him was the fact that people that followed any of the existing religions were essentially following a system of beliefs and words that were written thousands of years ago with the promise of a reward in your afterlife just because what's been said, with no proof whatsoever. And as well, some of those denominations of religions were iterations, which he felt diluted the message overall. For example, within Mormonism, the fact that once upon a time you were able to have multiple wives, but in the present day it wasn't allowed, but with no true meaning or justification that he felt was valid. This was the very thing that tied into everything that he did in the movie. If we go back to the beginning of it, before they even met Mr. Reed, the first piece of dialogue was about the size of the contraception magnum versus all of the other ones. Both Paxton and Barnes had different views on it and consumed the message of its marketing completely differently. Something that had no relevance to religion, but it showed word of mouth with Barnes' sister telling her about them versus the marketing message, which was what Paxton had experienced. They had two different messages from two different sources, and at its most basic form, that is essentially what the film was about. How much you choose to believe something that's being shown and told to you. Another way that this was shown to us was when they first met Mr. Reed, and he told them that he had a wife and that she was baking a pie, when in fact she wasn't. This wife never existed. This was made a point of immediately because it showed how people can just hear, listen, and believe, simply because somebody just told them something. If you set the environment to make it believable, then it becomes it. For example, he had a candle that smelt like blueberry pie, he had a warm welcoming home with a sign on the wall, and he gave the impression that he was married, so why would you not believe him? The use of the game Monopoly was included, and also the song Creep by Radiohead was used to support the dilution point. Mr. Reed used these as examples because they weren't originals, but they were considerably more popular than the very game and song that inspired them. The Landlord's Game, which inspired Monopoly, and The Air That I Breathe, which inspired Creep. This whole explanation was mentioned to prove the point of iterations, and that as more and more iterations get created, the core message gets diluted. Mr. Reed used the example of Jesus Christ, a figure that featured in many other religious texts and also shared a lot of similarities with other prophet-type beings which dated back thousands of years before Jesus Christ came to be alive. So it essentially questioned the originality and authenticity of the story in which the Bible was telling, the one that many people choose to believe. Because like Radiohead and like Monopoly, it was something which was done in a similar fashion before it was popular. As the story developed, it then spiraled dramatically into him putting the girls in his test in which he predicted every movement that they'd make, with the phrase of if they completed the test then they'd find the one true religion. Partway through the movie, Sister Barnes was killed by Mr. Reed because he stated that she'd be resurrected, just like how the Prophet was when he sent the original one into the basement to them. However, that didn't happen and Barnes bled out on the basement floor. Mr. Reed knew that she wouldn't be resurrected though because the Prophet wasn't in fact real. It was a double that was placed there as he had many people that were kept in cages underground. Mr. Reed did this because he wanted to show Sister Paxton the one thing that he believed all religions had, and it didn't matter which one it was, and that was control. Mr. Reed was able to plan and predict every decision that they would make based on their existing beliefs. He wanted Sister Paxton to be standing in front of the cages at exactly the moment that she was. During the ending of the movie, we saw that Sister Paxton stabbed Mr. Reed with the hopes of escaping, but he then started to slowly die. Once Paxton was back in the basement, Mr. Reed appeared and he was about to stab and kill her. This was after Sister Paxton put her hands together and prayed for the both of them, in saying that praying doesn't actually do anything, as was proven by a test, which kind of supports Mr. Reed's original point. But she felt as though there was something to be taken away from the comfort that praying brought people in the moment that they needed it most. There was something about this moment which really stood out to me. Sister Paxton's hands being at the center of the frame as he cuddled up to her in his final moments, almost afraid of the very thing that he'd been taunting the girls with the entire evening. Death and what was in the afterlife. It was haunting yet beautiful, and he was about to find out. As Sister Paxton accepted her fate and was about to be stabbed, out of the blue, the plank of wood with nails in that got a focus in the first third of the movie was bashed into Mr. Reed's head, and he died. This was a moment that can be interpreted in two completely different ways. The first is that Sister Barnes did actually do that, and she stayed alive for the entirety of the film where she wasn't in it, but right at the end mustered up the strength to kill him, almost as if it was some kind of miracle. Or it can be seen in a way where Sister Paxton died in that very moment, and what she saw after was as she transitioned into the afterlife. For example, the prophet said that when they entered the afterlife, there was an angel-like being that appeared, which could well have been Sister Barnes when she awoke. And also, when Paxton left the house, she was in snow, something else that was similar to what the prophet described, cloud-like things that weren't clouds, the snow on the ground. Plus, she also had no signal on her phone, and the butterfly landed on her hand, but then it disappeared, almost as if it were a hallucination. If she did survive, could that have been Sister Barnes visiting her? This is because Paxton said that that would be the very way that she would return if she could visit people that she loved after death, and Barnes said that that was beautiful. It's left down to us to interpret the ending, because that is exactly what this movie was about: religion, iterations, and interpretations of it. We can choose to believe whatever we want, and with the ending, Paxton either lived or died. There was a miracle, and Barnes returned to life for a brief moment and saved Paxton. Or she didn't, and it was all just part of Paxton transitioning into the afterlife. And just like the afterlife, whilst we walk this earth, we'll never truly know. My review of the movie. Heretic was a movie that I was really looking forward to seeing, and it's safe to say that I wasn't disappointed. From the story to the performances to the visuals to the soundtrack and the open-ended nature of the ending. Everything was as thought-provoking and seamlessly integrated as I expected. It was definitely a slow film, but I think that went in its favour. We didn't really get to the fact that things would be taking a sinister turn for what felt like 45 minutes. Up until then, it was all just conversation-based and sensing that something was gonna go wrong, but I liked it as it took its time. I would quite comfortably argue that this is probably the best thing that I've seen Hugh Grant in for years. He played such a haunting, unsettling, disturbed individual that gave off nothing but intelligence with a smile from ear to ear on his face, and it sent shivers down my spine. He was a barefaced liar throughout the entirety of it, and he was a very evil individual. It was a movie that was relatively difficult to keep up with in the sense that if you're watching it, it requires your full attention, as if you don't give it that, then you'll be left behind. One thing that I did appreciate very much were the camera angles and the different ways that they were used. For example, a lot of the conversation in the living room was shot behind the head of the two missionaries, as if we were peeking behind them. We'd only see part of Mr. Reed's face, and it almost symbolized the fact that there was something that he was hiding. Plus, I also thought the use of the camera spiraling around the characters was a good decision too, because it not only reflected the complicated nature of the house and the fact that it was like a trap, but it also shone a light on the thought-provoking nature of the movie and the feelings and thoughts that the characters were having. Another thing that I noticed when watching this movie was the soundtrack and the fact that it was almost like a ticking clock and a countdown that was happening. A countdown to the crescendo of the movie, or a countdown to the door being opened. The main reason behind it was to definitely add tension, and it was a fantastic choice. The scene where the people that were locked in the cages were revealed to us was a really powerful one, used as the point of how religion enters people's lives after suffering and how they can become easier to control after experiencing severe trauma was symbolized by this, and it was a really interesting approach. Mr. Reed kept the people hungry and in a state of suffering so that they'd follow his commands, even killing one of them just to prove his point. Was he going to make Paxton one of them? It was never revealed to us if he was going to, but he may well have done if he got the opportunity to, as it felt like this was something that he'd done several times before. The main question though that I always like to answer in its simplest form is this movie worth watching? Personally, I think it definitely is. It's a horror movie that's shown to us in a completely different way, and it's one where you're constantly guessing what's going to happen and if the girls are going to make it out alive the entire time that it's playing out. Is it one that you need to see in the cinema? I'm not too sure, but it obviously adds to the experience, so I would recommend watching it in theatres while you can. As after you've finished it, on your journey home, you'll just be sitting there thinking about what you've just watched and what it all meant. I don't think you'll regret going to see this one. So, there you have it, a review of Heretic and the ending explained. If you want to see more videos on your favourite movies and TV shows getting broken down, then click on the card in the top corner. Or alternatively, you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. And finally, if you'd like to see what I gave this movie out of 5 stars, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. What did you think of Heretic? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video and I'll see you in the next one.